Gypsy here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of W.A.S.P, and I've had some requests to feature some of W.A.S.P's music. Definitely legends of American metal, and they erupted in the early to mid-80s, and W.A.S.P formed in LA in 1982, and were initially hit with some controversy due to their subject matter, the lyrics, and the album covers and stuff like that that they initially released. And the PMRC, the Parents Musical Resource Center, led by Tipper Gore, definitely targeted W.A.S.P. They were one of the Filthy 15 back in the day. And there's something about their music, and I believe W.A.S.P, stands for We Are Sexually Perverted. So it doesn't stand for We Are Special People. And the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, I like to call that politicians make ridiculous claims. And I'm pretty sure W.A.S.P is Tipper Gore's favorite band. So here we go. So I definitely like adding little bits of information or little nuggets of history into these Chordplay episodes. And with W.A.S.P, there's an interesting connection with Chris Holmes, the former lead guitarist, and Eddie Van Halen. Eddie actually borrowed an Ibanez Destroyer from Chris, and he used that to help record Women and Children First. And I always found that really interesting. So apparently Chris and Eddie were buddies, like guitar buddies. I don't think they did any recording or anything like that. I don't know how much they really hung out. But obviously Eddie was borrowing guitars from Chris, so they obviously were good friends, and I always liked that story. So W.A.S.P actually has a connection with horror films and movies from Hollywood. They've had a lot of music featured in various films over the years. Ghoulies 2, if you like toilet horror. There's Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. There's like a martial arts ninja film, Ghost Warrior or whatever that was, Dudes. But then actually the band W.A.S.P is featured in the 1984 film Dungeon Master. And Dungeon Master, or The Dungeon Master, really is not a very good film. It's very cheesy. But then the scene with W.A.S.P, and they're literally on stage, they've got their sign, behind the drum riser and stuff. And Blackie actually is acting and doing some, little bits and stuff during that part. It's a weird movie. But if you're a W.A.S.P fan, you have to watch The Dungeon Master. So the music featured in this episode came from 4 classic W.A.S.P albums, and W.A.S.P has released 16 studio albums, 3 live albums, and various compilations, in their career. So they have a lot of music. But we're going to basically hit those first 4 W.A.S.P albums. So anyway, here we go. With the opening, that's the song Animal, Fornicate Like a Beast, right? I haven't dropped an F-bomb here on my channel, so I'm not going to start now. It's not actually Fornicate Like a Beast, but if you're familiar with the song, you know what I'm talking about. And it's like this. Riff in E. So we're just banging out that low E string. It starts with that G, F sharp to E power chords. And then there's partial chords, and you're changing the partial chord and you just keep going back to that low E open. So we're going to relate these chords to E. And that first one, you're basically barring the 5th fret there on the D and the G string against E. So that's going to be an E minor flat 6 implied, like that. The 7th fret on the A and the D together with that low E. So that's like an E sus 4 right there. Right there. And then you're going to go back to the 5th fret right there, and that's an implied E minor 7 right there. And then you're doing this. Fret, you could think of that like an E6 sus 2 right there, implied. But they're all, partial implied chords played against that E. Great riff. Next up's the song Maneater. This came from the album The Headless Children, and it's a simple riff, but it kicks you right in the teeth, like this. Short and sweet, but really cool. Just 3 hits on that E. And you start pummeling, kind of palm mute that low E. And then these pull-offs there. And pull-offs to the open string on the D and the A string. You're going to flip that, then you go to a higher E power chord, change the rhythm ever so slightly. And you're climbing up that A, B, D to E, you know, single note run. And I hammer on that first one and then slide into that E. That way I'm ready to get into that E power chord again. Riff, short and sweet, but that's a great one. Next up's The Torture Never Stops from the first W.A.S.P. album, and this is actually a single note riff. There aren't any chords that play here at all, but it's implying F-sharp Phrygian, so I grabbed it because I thought that was interesting. Something like this. Once again, and it's all single notes. We're grabbing that F sharp twice and then the octave above it like that, and then F sharp to E, and then F sharp to D right there, and then F sharp to C sharp, and then right here, that's where it reveals that it's actually Phrygian. He grabs that G note right there. There's F sharp Phrygian right there. Riff again. I'm totally a sucker for modal riffs like that. Really cool. Next up's the song Wild Child from the album The Last Command. And there's 2 guitars here, and actually W.A.S.P. does this quite a bit in their music, where one guitar will play like a melodic riff or motif, the other guitar will start laying out some power chords. And the first guitar part's doing this. Just repeats that over and over. So really slow there. Right? And then you take that and repeat that same motif over and over. So I'm going to loop that with the MXR clone looper, like this. And there's a series of power chords behind that, so I'm going to loop the motif and then play the chords, like this. Simple. So F sharp power chord, do a D power chord, a B power chord, and then back to F sharp. Repeat that a few times, and then it ends with that A, E to F sharp, like that. Motifs like that, where, you know, the melodic thing just kind of stays the same, the chords under it change, and that kind of shifts and changes the way that motif sounds, which is really cool. Next up's the song Restless Gypsy. This came from the album Inside the Electric Circus, and once again we have 2 guitars, and I'm going to use the MXR clone looper to kind of help me out here, but I'm going to flip what we just did with Wild Child. I'm going to loop the chords and play the melodic motif. I'm also going to share part of an intro guitar solo. But Restless Gypsy's like this. basic. The power chords behind the motif and solo, it's an E power chord ringing to a C power chord ringing to a D power chord ringing back to E like that. Ringing power chords. And then the second guitar is doing this kind of picked melodic pattern like this. And once again, that little two-note motif, it's just a B and an E, kind of played back and forth. But it takes on different sounds and tonalities depending on what chord is playing behind it. An E, a C, or a D. And then eventually you start hearing... so I'm hearing that, like I'm hearing that A up on top, like that. And then eventually I hear the B up here. Goes into a solo right there, and there's like kind of a spelled out, G arpeggio or triad right there, and then you grab that E, pretty basic solo, and then end it with kind of bending on that A right there. But you put those guitars together and you have that magical kind of sound like this. Next up to the song The Heretic, The Lost Child. This came from the album The Headless Children, and there's actually 3 guitars for this part. And the first guitar part's definitely playing this horror film approved, soundtrack. It sounds like something you'd totally hear in a horror movie like this. Playing with the flat 6 and also the 4th right there. And we're kind of picking through and creating this melody like that. Right? So that's guitar 1 right there. I'm going to loop this with the MXR clone looper. So there's guitar 1, and then guitar 2 actually comes in and does a part way up high like this. Right? Really basic. It's like open strings and 3 fretted notes there on the G, but it's that open B, open high E, and then you're moving to F sharp, and then the B, high E, G, B, high E, and you're just kind of creating this little melody like that. First guitar part, I'm going to loop this together, but here's guitar 1 looped. I'm going to add guitar 2. There's guitar 1 and guitar 2. And then here's guitar 3. Heavy power chord. It's like a shark attack is getting ready to happen or something right there. third guitar is really basic, but then on top of everything else, it's super effective. Alright, the last example here is Sleeping in the Fire from the first W.A.S.P. album, and as you can see I'm playing acoustic guitar, and I believe Blackie Lawless actually recorded and played a lot of the acoustic guitar parts in W.A.S.P.'s music. And this is very slow and very dreamy. Actually, I think it's one of Blackie's, best vocal performances. It sounds like he's literally about to cry, while he's singing, but it's very slow and picked through like this. Chord progression. So it's really basic, but you also have to think of how early this is. This is like from '84, somewhere around there, and there weren't really a lot of songs at that time that sounded like that. But then eventually you started to hear music, unplugged songs. Definitely there was a huge unplugged acoustic revolution just probably about 5 years after this song hit the streets. But right there you're doing an E5. And then that's going to move, from that E5 right there with all the open strings there. Move that back a whole step. Now it's a D6 sus2 right there. Don't play the low E, but everything else. Move that down a whole step. Now it's a C major 7 and play it the same way as you did the D6 sus2. Back to that E5 right there. W.A.S.P. song, and even though that guitar part's really basic, but it adds to that kind of mysterious and eerie sound. Really cool. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of W.A.S.P. Definitely a very important and influential band from back in the day, and their influence definitely is everywhere. Because I know when the controversy erupted with their lyrics and, visual content and whatever, everybody was checking them out. It was like, what? PMRC and Tipper Gore and what? And of course, everybody just flocked to W.A.S.P. to check out, what the problem was or what the controversy was. And I think that actually helped their career, even though it may have initially scared their record label or may have scared them. But I think enough people, like millions of people, just flocked to W.A.S.P. to see, like, what's the problem here? What's the song? What? Animal? And I think that's kind of what started it. But then over the years, they're still active. Blackie's still fronting the band. He's the only remaining, original member. But W.A.S.P. is still active. I've actually read that they're, putting together, a new album. I don't know when they're going to release it. I think they've been working on that for a little while too. And he's had some health issues and surgeries and stuff like that too. But a living metal legend, And depending on how old you are and what you consider metal, most people when they think of metal, they think of blast beats and shredding guitars and screaming demon vocals. And yeah, that's part of metal. But there's a lot more to metal than just that. And, it's one of those things where, the early years of metal, and you had bands like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. Eventually Motley Crue came out, they had pentagrams and stuff. And W.A.S.P., they had crazy imagery, blood, and they're throwing raw meat out in the crowd, and, controversial lyrics and stuff. So they definitely, shook things up and rocked the boat, as soon as they hit the scene. And they're legends, for sure. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.